Welcome everybody to the 13th Gardeners and Growers Workshop for the 11th of June 2017. And as usual, we'll just go through the applying as a private student and getting access to a lot of the old teachings of Mr. Keshe, as well as all the current new teachings that have been going on every week. And then purchasing the books. Apparently there has been some delay on the books. People have been ordering, and I think they are sorting that out, and they should be available for shipment again. Okay, so today I'm looking at seeds again, but from a different perspective. Seed as a plasma, the storage of seeds, and in the germination of seeds, but all from the plasma perspective. Now, in the past, we've done the seeds, and this is just was a very basic seed structure that we had put up, where you've got that little point on the seed was your DNA or information of the plant. That's where all the information is stored on the type of plant it is. And then the majority of your seed was dried GANs, and then you had the outer shell of your seed. So it's a very simple structure of a seed, and I know it's a lot more detail, but for the sake, we just keep it simple. And point that we're going to make across today is really looking at the seed from an entirely different perspective. So the seed is like a star or a planet, because when we plant the seed, it starts to behave exactly like a planetary system, a star, or a plasma. And when I watched this workshop, I was quite intrigued at the beginning as to how one can relate it to that. But it's amazing when you start looking at the details. We know that the Earth is also a plasma with fields coming out of the top and entering from the bottom. And we understand the plasma as well. What we've been taught about the plasma is that the fields are coming out of the plasma of the magnetic fields, and that these same magnetic fields are now attracted by the plasma and are called gravitational fields coming in. So we have fields going out and coming in on a continuous basis. The sun is the same story. It has fields coming out and is absorbing the fields from the bottom. So now when we look at that perspective in nature and around us in the universe, and we start applying that same principle to the seed, we see that the seed is essentially a plasma as well, because when we put the seed into the ground and we water it, it starts off with putting out this little root structure. And these roots allow more interaction with the fields from the earth. So you can see as the seeds, we put it in the ground and it starts getting those first little roots coming out. Those first little roots allow the seed to start interacting, or those roots start interacting with the fields from the earth. So we have fields flowing inwards into the seed through the tiny little root structures that start off first. And once the root starts to get more fields, the seed then puts up its antenna, as Mr. Keshe called it. And so now we can see that from those fields that will start feeding through into the seed, those fields start coming out of the plant, well, as we see that as the little stem of the plant. And now we have, when we look at it on this basis, now we have the same flow of the fields. So we have the fields absorbing from the bottom, the fields coming in from the bottom through the root structure, and then the fields are coming out from the top structure and they're going round. So you can see that the seed structure is the same as the plasma, as the sun, the earth, the universe. Everything is exactly the same. So it's only the scale that differs. So from the universe all the way down to a little seed, it's exactly like the same when it starts interacting. And now when we show this picture again with a tree, it gives us a bit more perspective, because whether it's a tiny little seed or plant, a shrub or a tree, it's the same flow of fields coming in from the ground and coming out from the top, and you get this dynamic flow of the fields, just like in a plasma. And then when I looked at this, it sort of starts to explain a few things, because when we plant a couple of plants in pots, or whether we put them in the ground, or like in our case where the roots are sitting in water, all of these create different conditions, and so you have different interactions of the roots and the earth's fields. And so this can possibly explain why the same plant that's grown in a pot will be slightly different and grow differently than the one that's grown in the ground, is because of that connection or lack of connection with the earth's fields. And then I thought there's a lot of other things that came up after I had looked at this and tried to understand it, was that the same story that seeds that are blown around by the wind only germinate in a specific area. You know, if you think there's hundreds of thousands of seeds from plants that are blown all over the place, but very few seem to germinate, and they're in specific areas, is because do they find a similar match in the field of the seed to that in the ground, and that's where they will germinate, because plants realize and the seeds realize they only have one chance where they know where they have to set up and germinate is that point in the ground. They can't get up and move along if they don't like that area. So I thought that's something that we can ought to think about for the future. And then the other story was, many of us have planted a shrub or a small tree in the garden only to see that it hardly grows and looks very unhappy. And yet if we move that plant to another location in the garden, it suddenly thrives, is happy and grows. And this is a question we have to ask as well. And location is is important in terms of getting sun or too much sun as well, which we've understood it. But is it also coming down to the field interactions in the ground as well, where certain spots, the field interaction is good for the plants, and in certain spots it's not good for the plant. So these are a lot of questions which sort of come to mind when I've understood that one. Anybody else with some comments on that? Okay. I'm going to continue then. The next section is why can seeds still germinate after years of storage? We know with some of our seeds that they can last for sort of 1 or 2 or 3 years, or some seeds can even last for many years. And there's a question as to why they last. So coming back to our simple basic structure of the seed, is that point in the seed there where the DNA, where the information of the plant is stored. So this is where all the information of the plant is stored. It's layers of magrofields which determine what plant it will be, the size, the color, the shape, etc. So all that information is stored in that point. And now the dried GANs in the rest of the seed is essentially the reserve energy of that seed, and it is this energy which ensures that information is not lost. So it's this energy which keeps that information of that seed alive and constantly available. And when this reserve tank runs out, the seed loses its information, and then we see that as a seed that just doesn't germinate. But essentially its reserve tank, or that dried GANs, that energy, storage energy, has run out. And so that little seed cannot keep and maintain its information of what it's to be. Now, if we understand this field strength in the dried GANs of the seed, we could create a field around the seeds that continually feed the seeds in terms of storage. And as Mr. Keshe says, we could then end up storing seeds for centuries, thousands of years without having to freeze them. Because if we understand what field strength that dried GANs is, we can place them in an area where we're constantly feeding these seeds with the energy that they need so that they can retain that stored DNA information. Any questions on that one?
Just a point of discussion. A GM seed, they actually tamper with the DNA, I guess. Is that so, Jimmy?
Yes, I think they do, yes. Change certain aspects of it, yes.
Let me see. Right.
You know, that's what we've been sort of taught and explained, is that all this information that of what the seed will turn out to be in terms of a plant is all stored in maggraph fields and layers. And so the nature naturally stores that information from season to season. You know, if we plant a seed and take those seeds and replant them, that information is stored naturally. And if we start soaking our seeds in the CO2 water, then we essentially start taking away those, as we explained in the previous workshops, we start taking away those layers of information.
If they don't want to be there.
Yeah.
But if they do want to be there, they stick.
Yeah, fair enough. And one thing, what about dry GANs in water? It probably has something to do with dissolving the outside of the seed as well. What about dry, if you store them in dry GANs? Oh, hang on, you mentioned something about that a few episodes ago where this guy put his fruit into ash, wasn't it? Ash. That's a dry GANs, isn't it?
Well, his tomatoes that he stored in the dry ash, and that was storing, yeah, managed to store his tomatoes there. And that dried ash is essentially sort of nano-materials.
What we'd have to do is we'd have to figure out what GANs the seeds, the dried GANs that the seeds have, and probably match it so that the seeds, if the seed is emitting any fields, you are feeding it back to them in a sense. Because what'll happen is any plasma will always try to create balance by feeding from the stronger to the weaker. So the environment obviously has a weaker field of that specific GANs, so it will slowly bleed away in a sense. So we would have to actually create a strong field with the same GANs around the seed, and that will allow it to stay in that strong state indefinitely.
And this is why you're saying try and make a GANs of the seed material by grinding it up. Is that so?
Yes.
Well, that could be a solution. If you did grind it up, create a GANs of it, and then dried the GANs, if you had to then store your seeds in that, maybe it would, you know, and it would be pretty easy to test because some seeds only last a season. And then they're not fresh anymore. So it would be pretty easy to test on those kind of seeds to tell whether they would retain their strength and their viability.
So I don't know whether when you grind wheat, whether it actually destroys the DNA of the thing, but, you know, what about wheat in flour? Well, is that a possibility?
I think it is, but what we're going to have to figure out, and Mr. Keshe has mentioned it pretty recently, is how we can create the GANs of something without destroying it. You know, like the new thing that they've said is to create GANs of GANs. Have you heard that term?
No, GANs of GANs. Please explain, Lisa.
So what they're doing is they're taking 2 vials of GANs, one a certain strength and the other less, and then they're putting that into salt water and creating a field in between and creating GANs in that salt water. That is then the GANs of the GANs instead of the GANs with the metal plates.
Right.
So this is something that is just being explored now, but it is a way to get to the point where Mr. Keshe was saying that you can absorb the fields from something, or you can create the GANs or the imprint of something without actually destroying it.
That's got possibilities, hasn't it, really, for seeds and things like that?
Yes, for the long-term storage, you know, because obviously the current storage is to freeze all our seeds. You know, we know there's a couple of banks around the world where they storing seeds, but in very ice-cold conditions, which is just delays.
It delays the fields.
The loss of the fields.
The loss of the fields. That's all it's doing.
Whereas if we created something else with the fields, then let's say that can be stored for centuries in that condition without having to worry about whether you would run out of electricity and power to keep things cold.
You're actually storing the GANs, the seeds in their own fields. So yes. That's an indefinite sort of situation, isn't it? It is. For the seed, that is.
That's right.
That is. And if you could create the GANs water of that, and perhaps then, let's say, for example, you had to coat nanoplates with it, and you would create a nanoplate box, maybe it would do the same thing, because your nano is superconducting and super insulating, so it would be isolating it from any outside fields, keeping it in its own fields, and maybe it would just keep it at a static state so it would never lose fields. That's another way to look at it too.
That would be interesting, because it'd be, well, I think it'd be pretty difficult to nanoplate a plate other than using, you know, the usual methods. But I guess it could be done.
You know, I've always wanted to actually test and get some of that copper sheet and create a box and see if you nanocoat that box and you start putting different food and different things in there, whether you could store them almost like they talk about the pyramids, or maybe create a nano-coated copper pyramid.
Yeah.
In there.
Funny you should mention pyramids. I've got the dimensions of a pyramid, which 72 degrees, which I think the Russians were experimenting with it, and I had the same idea. If you could nanocoat the inside of the pyramid, you could get some remarkable stuff, because the pyramid itself doesn't have to even be metal. Apparently they experimented with plastic and fiberglass, and if we can nanocoat plastic.
Yes.
So there's a possibility of nanocoating inside and outside the pyramid.
Interesting concepts to think about, yes. I haven't got time in the day to do all these wonderful experiments. I'd love to do them all.
Well, I hope to embark on a pyramid pretty soon, but when time permits.
So we should see one around your house soon then.
If you see a glowing apparition in the west, you know it's me and the pyramid.
Any other questions or comments on that section there?
Are we looking at when you're looking at the strength of the field, are we talking about putting the seeds in the same field strength, Or are we looking for flow between the fields? In which case you'd have to have a stronger field, wouldn't you? How does that work?
It could be stronger. Just trying to think.
I think your outside would need to either be stronger or the same.
Or the
to
same
balance.
to give that interaction and the balance between the two, so that none of them is losing fields. Does that make sense?
I'm wrestling with it.
Okay.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Thanks.
Hello, good morning, Lisa and Jim. This is Alex. How are you?
Hi, Alex. Good on you.
Fine with you, Alex.
Oh, terrific. I'm glad you have time to do these seminars because these are really, really important. I really appreciate it. The GANs of the GANs thing that you just mentioned there, can I just ask for clarification? Was the GANs itself put in like a baggie and then put in the salt water and then a nano-coated wire hooked up between the two? Or were you diluting the GANs right into the salt water?
No, it needs to be in a container. They haven't really specified. They just said a vial. So I'm not sure whether you would use a test tube, a glass, or a plastic. And exactly what you're going to get with what, I still have to figure out whether if you, let's say, put a stronger CO2 with a weaker CO2 and in between you create CO2, or whether the other option is zinc oxide one side, copper oxide the other side, and do you get CO2 in the middle? I think
it was your latter choice there, the GANs of the copper and the GANs of the zinc. I don't know if you took the GANs of the CO2, would you produce CO2? No, I didn't even consider that one.
Yeah, I wasn't too sure. Because if you have two CO2 patches and you have one strong and one weak, you are creating a field of CO2 in the middle as well. If you know, in the health section, that's what is recommended and that's what happens. So it obviously happens the same with two test tubes in salt water.
Okay, so then getting back to Neil's question, then if we put the seed in the GANs, then the seed itself becomes part of the give and take there. Whereas if we put the seed in between two packets of GANs, one bigger, one smaller, then wouldn't that be more of a preserving type of arrangement, do you think?
I think you would need two strong ones on either side. Because then you would at least continually be feeding the seed in the center. So it wouldn't be able to lose its fields, because obviously it loses its fields, and that's when it stops retaining its information, and it can't have the energy to grow anymore. I think that is possibly why all seeds are starchy, because the starch portion is the energy portion.
Okay, but the starch portion would be of a matter state, would it not?
In the seed, yes, but when it gets watered and it's soaked, it's actually, what Mr. Keshe says, it's a dried GAN. So when it gets soaked, it becomes energetic again.
Oh, so the starch inside the seed is actually a starch GANs?
Well, it's the energy portion of the GANs. That is what he said. He said it's dried GANs, and it's the energy portion that when it's activated by the water, it's going to help the genetic information to become a plant, because it's giving it its energy.
Okay, so then the duration of the storage period of the seed is determined by how long this energy is preserved.
Exactly. And I'm thinking, if you think about it rationally, the smaller, tinier little seeds don't last as long if you keep them in a packet. But something like a corn seed can last up to 10 years. And that's got a very large starch portion.
Is there, I don't know much about the corn aspect of it. Does the corn experience any rusting or molding in the seed? I'm looking at comparing that to, say, tubers in a plant like a ginger or water lily, where they have a large tuber. Would the mushy, or what do you call it, the solid part be there also starch GANs?
I'm sure it is, but you know, those type of things can't really dry out too long, as far as I know. They need to kind of stay moist. Whereas with your maize seed, I just remember from when I was young, my aunt and uncle had a farm and they grew maize and or corn, and they could keep their seeds up to 10 years, and they were dry as a bone, you know. As long as they were kept in that dry condition, they would, in sealed containers, they would germinate up to 10 years later.
Okay, that's beautiful. Now, is there a difference between the seed, an annual and a perennial, in terms of this type of energy that's in it? Like, is it the seed itself that determines whether an annual is an annual, or let's put it this way: an average gardener, I would believe, would think that a plant will flower as a let's say a perennial, and then it would go into dormancy through the winter period, which I guess for you is plus 25 degrees.
22.
22. I think we just hit that yesterday, finally. Yes. Okay. Yeah. So, let's ask you about a perennial plant. Then would the seed in the ground then would be bigger, be more durable, have more energy? How does that go with the cycle? Like, okay, I guess what I'm asking is, how does it survive a seasonal change? Does it actually have to go into the freezing cycle or the dormant? Is freezing and dormancy the same thing regardless of the temperature? Does the perennial plant have to go through that cycle?
Well, let me answer it one way as well. Is if you're looking at seeds that are just annuals or perennials, I mean, all that information is stored in the seed, and that's what the plant is going to become. And the plant knows if it's an annual, the plant will know it's got a very short lifespan. So that lifespan is a couple of months. Whereas an annual in a tree, its lifespan can run from 10 years to hundreds of years with a tree. So plants, all different plants will have different lifespans. Now, when you're looking at the next point you asked, were the tubers, as to, you know, tubers, they can sit in the ground and they're dormant, and then they'll only be activated in springtime, for example. Now, there's a lot of conditions which will activate that tuber, and it's going to be temperature, but it's also going to be the rainwater, but it's the right strength of that rainwater that's coming in. Because we know with the different seasons, you're having different MAGRAV strengths. And even in winter, if you if you water that tuber, it's not going to do anything. Yet the spring rain is the one that activates it. And because it's a different MAGRAV strength in the water from the fields, so that all has a role to play as to when these, because the conditions are correct in the environment for that plant to come out.
And then we talked about that before, and then the conclusion was that the CO2 in the spring is different from the CO2 in the fall.
Yes, yes. And the plants recognize these changes.
Yes, go ahead.
No, just in terms of the seeds as well, you know, there's seeds of perennials and there are seeds of annuals, but the annual always seems to have a seed, whereas any form of perennial, you can have other methods of propagation as well. But I don't ever see any other methods of propagation with an annual. Because,
Right.
or, you know, even though let's say a garlic will grow for a season and it will split its, you know, you'll take a clove and you'll create a whole garlic plant, but then those garlic cloves can in essence then be split and make new. So they're not actually a seed, it's just it's a tuber as well in a sense. So and to me that's not really, because it's the same plant but it's different, but it's not seed. And yes, you can get seeds off a garlic, but I know all the farmers here all cut the heads off.
The same here.
Yes, so they actually, you eat those lovely scapes. Yes, they call them scapes. They're actually really delicious. I don't know if you've ever tasted them. They're really yum. So that is a blossom, a smaller blossom that they chop off the top of the garlic. And so yes, it's there are various methods of propagation for perennials compared to annuals, and mostly if they have a different method of propagation, even though they have seed, the seed is very rarely easily usable. So if you have something that runs with a root, then usually the seeds are there, but they're not really easily germinatable. So they've almost decided they've got a few different methods of propagation in making their babies, like a strawberry, for example.
Right. I just want to go back to the GANS seed germination aspect of it. The GANS, so forget the question of destroying the plant right now to create the GANS. Let's say we do create a GANS of a particular plant. Are we suggesting that that GANS will enable the seed of that plant to grow better? Or are we saying that the CO2 GANS in the spring will make the seed propagate?
Yeah, I think it'll be both, because that's the one experiment I'm going to be doing next, is to make the GANS of the actual seed, because the seed contains all the essence of that plant, and then put it in a reactor and spin that, because then you know you are creating giving the right energies and fields to the plant, which is specific and matches the plant. So that's still something yet to be done.
I would think that in what you just described, that you'd be taking the energy that's in the seed and actually elevating that to the GANS state.
Yes.
And thereby giving it a chance to prolong its storage life, because in a GANS state, being in a higher state, there would be more preservation ability, whereas in a seed state, I'm wondering if the duration of the seed would have something to do with the coating of the seed itself, because the coating of the seed would be in a matter state, whereas the meat inside the seed would be in a plasmatic state.
Well, it comes down to us, if we look at that storage as a sort of a battery, and it depends on how long that battery is designed to last.
Well, the reason what's in the back of my mind is the wonderful product that we had, where we could put the CO2 GANS in the fridge, and it would pick up all the odors within the fridge.
Yes.
And we don't exactly really want that if there's a rotting that's going on. We need to preserve that GANS to avoid that type of situation. So I'm just trying to rationalize how do we using the CO2 GANS as preservative in that type of situation, and then using where we're stopping decay, and then using it in the other situation where we're trying to promote the life.
I think the CO2, because it's part of, and it's very well connected to the living body and the amino acid, I think that promotes life while the life is ongoing. But I think with the seed, you know, we tried this experiment in terms of, you know, putting it in the fields with the dried ganses and such, and it didn't seem to do anything to the seed at the time. But I think if we create this gans of the seed and then store the seed in the fields of that gans of the seed, I think it would create a good storage method.
That's a brilliant answer. That is a brilliant answer. That is fantastic. I'm going to switch horses, if I may, please. We go to the DNA within the seed. It's just my ignorance here. Does the seed have RNA?
Does the seed have
RNA?
I don't know. I'm a bit ignorant too. I'm sure it does, but it's in a preserved state waiting. So, you know, just like the DNA, it would be, because obviously, if we understand it, our RNA that we have is a product of all the generations before us. So it must be the same in the seed.
And also, it is in a plasmatic state, whereas the DNA is in a matter state.
Yeah.
Well, it's still a plasma, but it's a plasma of the matter.
I would imagine that the plants would have the RNA as well, because they are living entities, and I think they operate exactly the same. You know, what I'm learning and figuring out is that the universe operates in exactly the same way everywhere.
Exactly. Yeah.
So if we've got it, then the plants have it, and who's to say the rocks don't have it, and the insects don't have the RNA as well? You know, so because everything is the same, it's just the scale that varies.
And even Mother Earth must have her own RNA, which is a combination of all our RNA as well. So.
Well, yes, that's for sure. And so the motive for that question is actually when we're talking about retarding the GMO transaction, is it actually a DNA or is it an RNA retrograde there? That's the question.
I think they changed the DNA, but then maybe the RNA is what throws it off, because emotionally they don't want it there.
Oh, yes. That's
I'm guessing here, but that's the way I feel about it.
Okay, well, you're doing just super great here. Now, we've not discussed the mitochondria, and I don't know if I'm jumping ahead on your seminar or what, but both people and plants have mitochondria, and the mitochondria are recognized as your energy generators. It is known that the mitochondria have a different DNA from the human genome. And I was wondering if the mitochondria in the plants have the same difference. So, gee, that's a funny statement. Same difference? That's like government intelligence. Okay.
Maybe you should go look that one up, Alex.
No, please help me. Please help me. So what I'm asking, I guess, it's a twofold question. Is the DNA in the mitochondria in the plant different from the plant mitochondria? And we know that the DNA in the mitochondria is different in the human genome. And then so the second question would be, is the mitochondria in the human genome and the mitochondria DNA in the plant the same DNA? So that's a double-edged question.
All right, I'm going to answer it in a different way, and hopefully it is the right answer. is maybe it doesn't matter because, and it's all the same, because we know that we all come from the same carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen, whether we're an animal or a plant. So we're all made up of the same fields. So will they be different?
And it's, you know, what we're figuring, for example, like with the emotional, the strength of the emotion of a human is the zinc, and the strength of the soul of the plant is the zinc, and the emotion of the plant is the sulfur. So, you know, everything has its own strength. So maybe if you look at, let's say, the energy of the mitochondria in the body, either it's going to have a sort of a, you're going to look at it in the energy strength for a human and then the energy strength for a plant, or you're going to say, well, maybe we all use the same type of energy, which is the hydrogens. So we haven't actually looked at that in detail, because we're still trying to figure out the whole photosynthesis and all of these things from a real scientific point of view. But I don't know if we're going to need real scientists to work this out for us, whether us garage scientists can do it or not. So yeah, that's one for the future referencing, I think.
Well, yes, you will be able to do that if one of the additional purchases we could have is. I was pleased on Thursday that we had the purchase of the spectroscopy, the nuclear spectroscopy coming. That's going to be fabulous. And then the other instrument that I was talking about last week, the somatoscope, which we could see at a magnification of 125,000 and actually show living culture, is definitely going to answer that. Then yeah, we would have that. We would have that capability. We don't need to get on the rocket science aspect of it. But the fact that you brought up the zinc again is a very key point, because that's one of the things that I've been trying to work with, because Mr. Keshe has been mentioning that, or emphasizing the zinc aspect of the GANs, and how it elevates the soul and the spirit, and I'm having phenomenal results with that. So perhaps at a later date we can talk about that more. So thank you for answering these questions.
Well, you know, it's not for nothing that zinc is one of the most abundant elements on the planet either.
Excuse me, just 1 second. May I slip a question in here, please?
Yeah.
Regarding the GANs, my friend in South Australia, he appeared once on the Keshe show, but he makes a lot of GANs, similar to what you do, Lisa, and he said they're in layers, and the heavier in gravitational and magnetic layers, and he said the heavier layers or the more active layers are at the bottom of the GANs. Could you elaborate on that if you know anything about that, please?
Well, what I do know is that if you make a GANs of a plant or something, so obviously there's a huge amount of different material in there. When you wash it and it settles, you tend to get different colors forming from the bottom to the top, and your CO2 and stuff like that, which seems to be white and light and fluffy, does kind of sit at the top, and then you have other stuff which tends to be darker and sit at the bottom. I also know that if you put current on a GANs of a metal, like if you do copper GANs and you crank up the current, what will happen is that it'll form in layers, because it'll start off with lots of oxygen, and then it will have less and less oxygen in the water unless you bubble it and turn the voltage down, and then you will get layers of different colors forming from the blue to the brown, because they'll lose oxygen as the water is losing oxygen, it will turn from CuO2 to CuO to Cu.
Yeah.
So that's where you also can get layers.
Thank you. Just one other question on GANSs. I'm making a zinc GANS and with 2 plates of zinc. And in fact, what I'm getting is a rolling off the zinc of a black material.
You're going too fast.
Too fast, is that it?
Yeah, it's too fast.
Yep.
I've gotten that before, and then when you dry that back out again, it almost goes a metallic color.
Yeah.
So it is actually the just coming off, the raw zinc is just falling off. So what I do is I usually crank up my power just to get it going, and then I turn it, my amps are on 0. I have no amps at all because it's my little power supply.
Yes.
So I have no amps, and it's about 1.5 volts, but it's reading 0 amps, and it's still making fluffy white.
Good, thank you very much. Actually, I don't have a volt or amp control. I'm using just batteries, so that may be the problem.
Maybe
thank you
put
very
on
much.
A really flat battery.
Yeah.
Try a really, really flat one.
I should be getting pretty flat one now. Thank you very much, Lisa.
Any other questions before we carry on?
Hi, Lisa and Jim. It's Vitek here.
Can you just talk up a bit?
It's Witek. How are you?
Witek. Hello, Witek.
Good, good. Thank you. I want to thank you for a great job you're doing for all of us.
We try.
It's great, you know. And I got maybe a little question. It's coming back to the GANs from a GANs, you know, because we in our group, and the Polish group, we used to do something like that. I'm not sure if it's a GANs from a GANs, but it was looking like that. That's, for example, if you're doing the, let's say you're doing the GANs from, let's say, copper and zinc, so you want to produce CO2, and of course you use a salty solution for that. So when you're going to wash it, you not throw this solution, you know, into the toilet, but you do the next GANs on the base of this solution. You know what I mean? And you know, but different GANs than the previous one. I mean, so not CO2. Let's say the second gas going to be use iron, and you're doing CH3, let's say. And if you produce this gas, and next one, if you wanna wash, so you're still not throwing that one, but you produce like, let's say, copper oxide on the base of that. And next time you're coming back to CO2, and again and over again, and until you can do like 10 times use still the same solution, which means that like getting stronger and stronger. I'm not sure if I explained it properly. Sorry, my English, but you understand what I'm talking about?
I know what you're saying, but I've never heard of anybody doing that.
Okay.
Maybe what will happen then, if you're using that first rinse water to start off your next GANs, maybe you are actually taking the fields of that first CO2 that you made into your next GANs. So every time you're doing a new one, you are adding to the different fields within those GANSs.
Mm-hmm.
So by the time you get back to the CO2 again,
Mm-hmm.
it should have fields of the copper oxide and the CH3.
That's right. Can be many different fields, and of course it's not like clear GANs of CO2 or CH3, but it looks quite strong. You know, I can feel it as a something which is very strong.
Something different.
Yes, and I use it for magraphs and for other things. And
okay.
It works very well, but it's not GANs from a GANs, like you said at the beginning.
Well, that's an interesting one. To try and get people to use it more than Witek and see what other benefits it might have.
Okay. Yes.
Oh,
That'd be nice, nice experience.
yes. Who knows?
Okay.
So nothing's wrong. We just have to try different things,
Yeah,
you know.
just
and-
find out where
Yeah.
you can apply it and what it's useful for.
Mhm.
Okay. So now we'll look at the whole germination of a seed from the plasma perspective. So when we put our seed in the ground and we water it, and we're adding water, now this activates the dried GANs. And so this GANs inside the seed needs time to become dynamic and start interacting. So this is the time from when we water the seed to the point where we see some action. So it's always a couple of days, depending on the seed, by the time we've added water before we even start anything. And we know that the seed starts swelling up. So it's essentially that dried GANs becomes bigger because we're adding the water to it. And then it's always a few days before we start seeing anything happening to that particular seed. So the first roots coming out of the seed start interacting with the magnetic field of the earth. Now then the seed gathers more energy from the earth because it's essentially opened up, by putting out its roots, it's opened up sort of a doorway, if you want to call it, to start gaining more energy from the earth. And the roots sort of act as that antenna to start interacting with Earth's field. So it can gather more energy within the seed structure itself. Now the GANs within the seed becomes more dynamic because the water's added energy, because we know water is H2O. So when we're adding water, we're essentially giving the hydrogens, which is the energy, additional energy to the GANs. And with the roots getting more energy from the earth, then the seed then releases these fields upwards from the top of the seed. And the seed begins to release a specific field strength that is unique to each and every seed variety, because what's in the DNA structure of that seed determines what the plant's going to be. And so if one looks at the fields are flowing up from the bottom, interacting with the, giving more energy to the dried GANs within the seed, which has now got additional energy and become more dynamic, releasing the fields. So these additional energy fields are going through and activating and sort of energizing that DNA structure of the plant. And those are the fields that are released at the top, which then will indicate what, and we'll see what plant it becomes. And as it releases its fields in a very concentrated form, we then start seeing the tangibility of these fields, and we see that as the little stem of the plant. So at first we probably don't even see it, but we would see this blast of energy coming from the seed, and then we start seeing this little stem of the germ of the plant coming out. But if we could have the right instruments, we would probably see this nice, huge little energy flow coming out before we see any tangibility of that plant. And here's just some of the examples I just took. There's of corn, that first little stem and the leaf coming out. There's wheat and beetroot and carrot, and there was another plant just with the different stages. So as we can see, it's the same principle, doesn't matter what type of seed it is. It's the root structure with the fields coming in, and through the fields again through that seed, and then we start and we see the first semblance of that stem. And that stem is then dependent on the type of seed it is and what the DNA structure of that seed is going to dictate what the plant is going to become and what it will look like. in the physical state that we can see. So we see out of the seed new life is created, because it's the fields that are flowing inwards and the fields that are flowing outwards creates our dynamic plasma of that plant, and it's all stemmed from that initial seed, which interacts with the earth's fields at first, and then we get the fields coming out, and it's these fields coming out through the seed which determines what plant it's going to be from the DNA structure of that plant. And Mr. Keshe explained it as the Alex plasma beads is exactly the same as a seed, because we know if you've got your copper rod and you create Alex's beads around it, and you've got your fields flowing inwards, you've got your fields flowing outwards, and what you're creating around your nano-coated copper is essentially the storage tank. So the Alex bead is essentially a little seed, or the seed is just like the Alex bead. So I thought that was quite a nice way to explain why the Alex beads work, because prior to this I had sort of I didn't quite understand how they worked until I come across this. So now I understand why the Alex beads do work, is because they're interacting with the fields plus the additional fields which we've put around it, and so that's how we can magnify and amplify the fields. So there was just the directions on how to make those Alex beads. And then when we look at the shape of all our fruit as well, because if we look at that plasma shape of the fields going in and the fields going out, it's the same even in the fruit that these plants produce. Because if you look at the apple there, the shape of the apple, you can see from the bottom the fields would be coming in and the fields would be coming out through the middle. If you look at the beetroot, it's exactly the same. You've got the fields coming in through the bottom of the beetroot, and then you've got the whole leaf structure of the fields coming out. Pineapple is the same. Your peach on a tree is exactly the same. Even your pumpkin is exactly the same.
A really ugly pumpkin.
It's all the energy flowing from the bottom in and out and creating that plasma environment. So, does that make sense?
A lot.
It did to me, but
Especially a Halloween pumpkin, mate.
there were some really nasty ones, but I thought couldn't do that one.
It somewhat explains the location of the seed too. In fact, when the seed is growing inside the fruit, they seem to generally be in the centre, except, of course, some fruits have seeds throughout. But
Yes.
the way the examples you've used, generally in the centre or coming off a stem in the centre of the fruit or vegetable.
Yes, I think, you want whenever you look in the garden and whatever vegetable or fruit you're looking at, we've got to look at it from the point of view now of there would be a point where the fields are flowing in, and then there would be a point where the fields are flowing out. And we just have to start discovering that in our gardens. So it's looking at everything from a very, very different perspective.
You mentioned emotional, or Lisa, I'm not sure who emotional content of the plant. That stands to reason because of the music effects and the directing hate towards the plant and it wilts, etc. That is there any effect on the fields when you try an emotion on the actual plant? Or I guess this is a bit yeah, up in the air at the moment. But I think if you use emotion, it's surely got to affect the fields somewhat in a growing plant. Is that so?
Yes, well, your emotion is a magro field. So your emotion of hate would be a certain strength, and your emotion of love would be a different strength.
Good, thanks. That's a good one.
So these are all interacting with your plants because they're taking in the fields from the environment, as you see, constantly. It's dynamic all the time. And so if we come along and start adding in to that as well, whether it be in a positive or negative way, you will see the results in your plants.
You know, and the thing is, by us feeding good emotions to the plants, we're giving them at their soul level, because our emotion is the same as their soul level. So when we love the plants, we are feeding their souls, which is very, very, very strong.
Makes a big difference in the growth rate of the plants, apparently. You know,
Yeah.
what I've seen anyway.
You know, there's various ways to think of this, and that the emotional strength of the plant is the sulfur. So we could add sulfur, but I've tried to make ganses. No, the emotional strength of the plant is sulfur. I've tried to make GANs of sulfur, and I've had some of this, what is it called? MSM or something? Sulfur?
SO2, sulfur dioxide, is it? Smelly?
No. It's that stuff that's like from a health shop. It's a white stuff. And that won't GANs. It turns crystalline if you put it into caustic. It turns into like a crystal. So I don't know what sulfur to GANs, except maybe onions or garlic, for example, to feed to plants. I would need maybe the proper yellow sulfur stuff that's like ground up element to try and
make the GANs, yeah.
Yeah.
Gee, that could be a smelly process if we're not careful.
But yes, so there's that aspect, and then yes, there's an aspect of, you know, if we feed them love, we're feeding their soul, and this is why they respond so well to our emotion, and this is why they tend to give us such a lot, because they give from their souls to give to our emotion, and that makes it very powerful for us to receive from the plants as well.
Thank you. That's an excellent answer. Thanks, Lisa, and thanks, Jim.
But yeah, just looking at that lovely pumpkin there, we do have a theme of one that we have to still bring up, and Mr. Keshe did a lovely little segment at one point in the private workshops that we just will have to do, and it's all about how all your fruit are like a spaceship. And I think that's going to be a really nice, a really nice little theme for one of our growers' workshops. Because in a sense, the plant is sending its offspring out into the nether reaches of the farthest flung Earth galaxy. So they have to ride in their spaceship until they can take root somewhere. So.
Sounds like a good analogy to me.
So I was thinking, okay, maybe we're going to Planet Zeus in our pumpkin. Here we go.
take your pumpkin too.
I just was mucking around with these Alex beads today, and they were pulsating away, and I like very much the analogy to the seeds. I hadn't thought about that, but I tried pulsating in the sense that from the measurements of the voltages, and I couldn't see any pattern in it, and I sort of put it in the sunlight, or a couple of them, and I tried talking to them, but I couldn't find any pattern, and I was just thinking that that might be the analogy with me trying to talk to the plants as well.
Apparently, just Alex seeds, and you may be interested in this, Neil. Alex beads, I should say. They're on their Facebook page today. They were setting up a standalone generator using Alex beads, just a circuitry diagram, which was interesting. It was strange that it should come up in this context here.
Yes, I think that.
Yeah, I think it's that analogy that that Jim was talking about before. How everything is acting in the same sort of way. You know, whether it's a planet or a seed or a Alex bead, the pattern is kind of the same.
Yes, you know, that's what struck me when I come across this as well, is that it did put it in nice perspective for me in that everything is like this. And so if we start understanding, then when we start creating anything with our nano-coated copper or making Alex beads, if we have this structure in mind every time we create, then I think we know what we're trying to create. You know, now we have a picture of what we're trying to achieve. We need to have that interaction of the fields around us, in and out. I've always said nature would tell us how to do it, because it's all around us. We just got to look at it from a totally different point of view. Yes,
you're right. With the Keshe philosophy, it's off for a good start, I think. That's the main thing.
Mm.
Can I just throw something out for Lisa? With respect to the sulfur, you were hoping to get more of a liquidy type thing as opposed to the crystal thing from the sulfur, is that right?
Yes, it made a hard crystal, like a little rocks. It didn't actually GaNs anything, so it's obviously not the correct type of sulfur to GaNs. I think it's called MSM. Is that correct?
You're right. Yes.
Yeah, that stuff. It won't. I think it's obviously has some other kind of chemical mixed in with it, which doesn't allow it to GaNs.
Yeah, I think it has methylene or something in it. But I just was wondering if the sulfur is actually a byproduct of a precursor. Or was I'm thinking the plants are more focusing on the phosphorus. I'm trying to figure out how the phosphorus and the chlorophyll is affecting in the matter, emotional, and soul state of the plant.
I think that your phosphor is more to do with the matter state, because it's got the energy with the radiation. It's similar to with what we are needing also with the potassium. I think it acts as a similar mechanism as the potassium does in our bodies. And that's another thing we need to look at, is how to make potassium GaNs. I see that was one of the things that Mr. Keshe suggested in the last workshop too. And I hadn't even thought of plain potassium GaNs. I have made folic acid GaNs, but maybe one can just GaNs, what's it, is it B12?
B12, yes.
Yeah, I think maybe one can just GaNs some B12, because I have GaNs the folic acid, and that's very strong as well, the folic acid GaNs. You can actually, it almost made me feel nauseous to touch it, feel the fields of it. Very strong.
I thought the potassium was used as a potassium hydroxide, and then used in an alkaline state as opposed to in a GaN state.
Well, if you listen to this last workshop, it's got it in there, and he suggests one uses it with the zinc. When he was talking about all the different brain problem type diseases.
Okay, I missed that part. I was we were looking at the nano coating and improving the nano-coating aspect of it. So we were using a very little amount of potassium hydroxide in with the sodium hydroxide.
Yes.
Yeah, that'll give you the fields. Then when you make CO2 from those plates, then you will get that field strength of the potassium in that mixture. So that's the way I've understood it as well.
Okay, all right. Yeah, so I think I'm just looking at the chart of elements here, and I'm just thinking that the potassium is in an alkaline state, and the phosphorus being more in an acidic state. But the phosphorus aligns itself with the nitrogen, and then the sulfur aligns itself with the oxygen. So how I arrived at the conclusion, if the nitrogen is a precursor for the oxygen, then the phosphorus could be a precursor for the sulfur. So anyway, it's just a thought pattern that I just wanted to elucidate on.
Well, if you have a look at, Jimmy's got a whole thing on how the nitrogen and, the different elements are created, but it's a bit too complicated here. But when you're looking at the nitrogen and how it's creating the oxygen or the carbon, and it's all to do with stable or unstable type of elements.
Yes. The real interesting aspect of it is the interchange of energies in the hydrogen there, and then understanding that the hydrogen in a matter state and the hydrogen in the plasmatic state is actually a different hydrogen. So that's where you get into the deuterium and the tritium.
Yes. Yeah, when you look at the difference between nitrogen and carbon, it's the difference is 1 neutron, 1 proton, 1 electron, which is deuterium. So it's that, or 2 hydrogens, if you can, either way. But that's the difference. So that's how you get that change in the plasmatic form from a nitrogen to oxygen or carbon. Is either the addition or release of that hydrogen fields.
Deuterium.
Oh, that's an excellent answer too. Boy, we're doing great today. The one thing on these diagrams here right now, what I see on the panel is the field flow around the various fruits and the beautiful pumpkin there. The thing at the bottom, though, I mean that's the ideal situation, and it's kind of a scientific viewpoint of it, where the fields are kind of like an aura around the plant. What we're missing is the interchange between the environment, the rest of the environment, and the plant, because it seems to me that the plant is either looking at an environment that's either in the ground or in the water or in the air, and there has to be some kind of interchange. And I was looking at one of the plants which I had done very poorly, and I'm ashamed to say this, but anyway, the leaf part of it dried up, and obviously began to rot away. And so normally when you prune a plant, you would, I guess, pluck off the dead leaves, and then the new leaves would kind of grow in there. The interesting thing is that the energy comes from the stalk and then is transferred to the leaf. But in this particular plant, the leaves were actually growing in the air. So in other words, the dead portion of the leaf was in between the new leaves and the main stalk of the plant, and so it wasn't getting the moisture, or it wasn't getting the nutrients from the pot, but it was getting it from the air, although the plant was originally planted in the pot. So this to understand how this is working, I think is something that I'd look forward to down the road with what we're trying to do here.
What we have to understand as well, Alex, and which is a bit of a mind thing for me, I'm battling, but this is, as you say, it's the sort of stylized version of what's happening. But Mr. Keshe has always said that there is a majority of fields going in and out in that axis point, whatever you'd like to call it, but fields are going in and coming out of every point as well. So what we're looking at here is not really correct, because you have to kind of, it has to be shown that it's shining out and pulling in every single other point as well.
You're talking about all the atoms around also having their own field strengths.
Yes, well, that plus the entities itself, you know, he says that, for example, the Earth, yes, where the axis point is, where the Earth spins, you get strong gravitational in the one end and magnetical out the other. But he's always said, do you understand that there's gravitational and magnetic fields coming out of every single point on the planet, not just the top and the bottom? And they're also different, obviously, those energy grid lines that are slightly stronger or weaker as well. And that flow differently, the ley lines, as they call them, or whatever. So there are stronger and weaker points all over the globe, and there's also stronger and weaker points everywhere else as well. So it's not just singular points. And that has to be for everything.
Sorry, Lisa, are these the nodes you're actually locating with the Klaus technology?
Yes.
Oh, yes. Thanks.
Most definitely.
Because when you look at the leaf structure, you know, some leaves are very smooth on the edges, and others are very, very serrated on the edges. Particularly look at some of the herbs, and every single point on that serrated edge of the leaf is another interaction point with the connection with the fields. So the more complex that interaction is with the fields, the more almost beneficial, the more minerals and more complex the plant will be. Now, if we look at a simple lettuce leaf, and we look at, it's a very simple shape of a leaf, and we look at the analysis of that lettuce, it has a very basic mineral content. And whereas if we take a look at a herb, even like a stinging nettle, when you look at all those little points as interactions, and you look at that composition of the stinging nettle, it contains a lot more minerals and compositions than a simple lettuce. And so all these interactions that we have create that complexity in the plant.
So what are our long hair, short hair, long toenails, long, short toenails? I don't know, the way our bodies look, you know, what does that do for the fields, and, you know, what goes in and what goes out? Quite interesting as well.
Yes.
Mr. Keshe always says he can look at a body and he can tell the type of person by the length of the fingers and the way the face is shaped, and, you know, the hair and the eyes and everything, because the interaction of the various fields is telling a story.
You're saying the difference between a Neanderthal and a Caucasian is not that that's...
The difference between, you know, just everybody.
Tall, short.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no, just in terms of, you know, long, thin hands, fingers, short toes. All of these things tell a story about how you interact with your fields.
When you look at your body as well, if you know the Fibonacci numbers and the Fibonacci sequence, your whole body and everything in nature is to that Fibonacci sequence of either 0.5 or 0.618 or the certain ratios. And so your whole body, your fingers, your arms, your hands are all divided into those ratios.
that holds for all bodies, I believe.
Yeah.
But is Mr. Keshe indicating that there's a difference in field strengths on various sorts of bodies, I guess, various attributes of the body, I guess?
Yes, it's, some people you can see they have sort of tall legs compared to their upper body. And so when you look at that ratio, the ratio of their legs would be, say, 0.618 to the rest of their body. Now you would have a different Maggraf field strength compared to another person where they are sort of pretty much even, 50-50 between the length of the legs and the top half of their body, would have a different Maggraf strength. And that's what we see in the plants as well. Each shape and type of plant has a different field strength. It's just more complexity and variety in the plant world than compared to the humans.
That's excellent stuff. You just espoused there, Jimmy. I never thought of it like that. That's good stuff.
Because our soul has created our body, and our soul is expressing itself, and so our body shape is an expression of what our soul wants us to be. So it tells things about what our soul wishes to be and is like, and the different attributes. So quite interesting.
And it follows through with in the plant world. That's what you're saying, is it, Lisa?
Yeah.
Yes, and I'm sure that happens because, so you set yourself to have long fingers and long toes. You're going to absorb fields differently to somebody with short fingers and short toes, and the same in the plants. If they have certain shapes of their physical structure, they're going to absorb and give off different types of fields.
Hence the variety of, fruits, vegetables, trees, etc.
Yes. I mean, compared to the human being, I mean, we've got not much of a variety compared to the plant world when you really look at it from that basis. The plant world has huge variety of shapes, sizes, colors, all sorts, whereas the human body doesn't really have a lot big variety.
Yes, Scott, sorry.
No, go for it.
Carry on, Ross.
Just going to say that, the pineapple, looking at the one on the screen there, it's got a lot of points. They're actually projecting upwards. So that's gathering some sort of field that probably a smooth fruit like an apple has got no chance of getting.
No, each one knows what it needs, and so what we see is just the interaction with the fields around it so that it can get what it wants.
Most interesting.
I was even contemplating today when I washed my hair and, gave it a rub with a towel and I saw some of my hair falling out and I'm thinking, oh God, I'm getting to an age, where maybe my hair starts thinning a bit, and I'm thinking, is it that older people lose their hair because they want more fields to come from the environment and be absorbed on their skull? Because maybe we're needing more fields in because we're needing a bit extra energy compared to the youngsters. I don't know.
You talk about bald heads, you haven't seen me. Thing is, the religious idea of keeping bald heads, like monks and, it's right through religion, that is the purpose, actually, to spiritually advance. And that is the principle. I guess that's, as you get older, you are supposed to be spiritually advancing and your head gets bald. I must be fairly advanced being, I think.
Maybe a sign of baldness is sort of a genetically advanced. That's what I'd like to think.
Yeah, well, you and me too, mate.
Any other questions? Back on topic.
Jim, can I jump in with a question, please?
Yes.
One of the things that we're trying to discuss frequently, I've started running seminars myself on the introduction to plasma technology. Is that we sometimes don't know that things work, and let's say, for instance, in the health aspect. So let's say you have you lose an arm, and so we say that we can't grow the arm back. But when we look at a salamander, that a salamander can grow the arm back. So really, the statement has to be changed. It's not to say that we can't grow an arm back. It's that we don't know how to grow an arm back, because it is possible to grow an arm back, because obviously a salamander can do it, but we can't. So so the research or the discovery has to be as to why we can't do it and the salamander can't. Now, when we look at a plant, and what I'm wondering about is sometimes, and you would know better than me, sometimes you want to pinch the budding leaf so that the branch branches off into two. So instead of the plant being long and stocky, it would be short and squat. Are you with me on what I'm alluding to there?
Yes, I understand what you're saying. Yes.
Okay, so the question then becomes, how come the salamander, if you cut off the arm, well, we know why it doesn't grow a leg. Okay, so it grows an arm because of the field forces around it are differentiating the cells to actually bring back an arm. But it's interesting that if you pinch off the leading leaf bud off of a plant, it doesn't react the same way. And in fact, it branches off into two different directions. So comparatively speaking, if we operated more like a salamander, we could grow a limb back. We will lose a limb, we could grow that limb back. But if we acted like a plant, if we lost a limb, maybe we'd grow two limbs back. What is causing that difference and that change in that field? How is the plant reacting to the point where instead of growing back one leaf, it decides to grow back two leaves, changes its entire structure from being long and lanky to short and squat? It's just a question that's kind of crossed my mind this week. I'm putting you on the spot. How would you answer that, please?
It's a very good question. Well, I just look at from a human being perspective and the salamander and the plants. If you lose a limb, I think it all comes down to belief, and I certainly think that the plants are more advanced than us humans. I think we've just forgotten what we do, our capabilities are, whereas the plants and the others haven't. Maybe just with the plants, by pinching off that leading edge, we're changing the conditions maybe, and they're just adapting. They just have that ability to adapt. Whereas we think...
The salamander still needs that same limb, so it is happy to just grow that limb back.
Yes, I don't know. It's a good question,
Well, I'm just wondering what the plant is thinking of us when we're pinching it off, is to say...
well, maybe it's thinking that spot isn't a good spot to grow a leaf, so if I grow round by putting one on each side, then I can go round.
Actually, it's spot on, because what you're saying there is what happens out in the field here, I go around with a lawnmower and I cut the tops off all the grass, but the grass grows outwards. It doesn't stop growing, it grows outwards, and its seeds come underneath instead of growing vertically. It's in all cases, everything grows flat along the ground. It doesn't stop growing.
No, I think they just play with us often.
They're just smarter.
I think also it's got something to do with, like, you know, Mr. Keshe says, if you're on the planet Zeus, you might grow like 20 arms and 20 legs. So we've all got a character from our soul. And so
Yeah.
we would be growing, wouldn't we be in tune to grow another leg, but not another 2 legs, sort of thing?
Yes, because it's the soul dictating what we want to be, huh?
When you pull off the salamander's legs, it doesn't turn into a snake because it still wants to be a salamander, I guess.
Yes, that's what it wants in its physicality. That's what it wants. You know, the plants are the same thing.
Yeah, I think the plant, because a plant can't move, it obviously then decides that spot where its leaf was is not a good spot to grow, so it has to go around. Whereas something that moves just wants its movement back, so it'll grow its limb back. And we're just too stupid to even do any of those things. Or we just don't believe we can.
Well,
you know,
I wouldn't use the word stupid, Lisa. I'd say we aren't probably aware enough to do those things. We've probably got it latent in us, but we just got to learn a bit more.
We've just forgotten that we do have that that ability.
That's spot on, mate.
Okay. Any other questions? Hello?
Hello.
Oh, okay. I thought maybe we'd gone off the internet.
It was so quiet for a minute.
Any other questions?
No, none from me, but thanks very much. It's been a very interesting workshop with everybody's input.
Yes, it has been great.
I'm quite excited about the whole thing. Thank you very much, you two. You do a great job.
No, thanks, because it's nice to have everybody's input, and because it's all new for all of us, so it's great to have different from different points of view and different perspectives.
One question for down the road. Oh, yes, go ahead. Go ahead, Neil.
Oh, no, I was just going to say thanks very much. I'm just supporting what Ross was saying. Yes, I've enjoyed it very much. Thank you.
Thanks, Neil.
I was just wondering, Jim and Lisa, are we going to be covering bacteria in the near future and how it interacts with the plants?
I can do it the next session. I've done bacteria myself, but I haven't come across it in any of the workshops, in any of the private workshops. Mr. Keshe has not mentioned it at all. So I've done something on myself, and my understanding, you know, trying to use from a plasma perspective. So I can bring it in for the next workshop, and then it's good, something that we can all discuss around, because we haven't had that from Mr. Keshe at all.
I think it was number 6 or number 7 that Lisa put up the charts there with the. You know what I'm referring to, with the different states for the humans versus the plants, and then the insects and the bacteria, and that was so that would be like a new area to kind of explore. So I'm not trying to rush you along. I'm just
no, it's just I haven't brought it up because I was hoping I'd find, you know, going through all the old workshops, I'd find something on it, but I haven't come across it yet. So I didn't want to bring anything out that I wasn't too sure of. But I'll bring it out, and it's just as a point of discussion, really. That'll be good.
Well, certainly when you're ready, because it is a pretty important
Yes,
Oh,
pretty
it is
oh.
very
important discussion.
I think it is important too, and break new ground, Jimmy. Use your intuition. I reckon you're capable. We'd be interested to hear about it, and I'm sure Alex has got some input here too.
Yes, we can all have the input, you know, so I'll bring it up for the next workshop. Okay, it'll be all right. Good.
And you know, it seems to be that there's like a ladder of the different types of living creatures on the planet, from the tiniest bacteria and virus all the way through. I think, well, bacteria, I don't think of virus, you know, virus is something else, but from the bacteria all the way through to what we see as ourselves. If you look at the birds, the fish, all of these different creatures and their blood types and their, like the plants and the magnesium, and there's like a ladder. When you look on the periodic table and you look at Mr. Keshe and his copper and zinc and all of the elements that he uses, there's a sort of a stepping stone type of ladder effect with all of these different creatures on the planet. So the trick is to find, because there seems to be a pattern, and it's for us to find that pattern, which I think might be quite interesting.
Oh, I
Yes.
think you're right on there, Lisa.
Okay, so any other questions, or we'll call it a day? All right. Well, thanks everybody for participating. It's been an enjoyable one today, as they always are. And thank you for your input.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for your great efforts.
Thanks. Bye.